Hello. Good evening, good evening, good evening. What is going on? It is I, Mark Henry, with 2 chapters of P. Ross. I'm going to try to keep it quick, because I have a flight in the morning at 6 a.m. local time. And, you know, I'm kind of recovered from jet lag, but only mostly. And that's going to be rough, so we'll keep it quick and then I'll go to bed. Fun fact, I was looking over my old videos on this stream because they're going to get deleted after a while. And I realized I haven't had a haircut since the stream began. Fabulous. Chapter 31 is called The Nature of Nobility. The 2 talents had a reassuring weight to them that had nothing to do with how heavy they were. Anyone who's been without money for a long time will know what I'm talking about. My first investment was a heavy leather purse. I wore it underneath my clothes, tight against my skin. Next was a real breakfast. A plate full of hot eggs and a slice of ham. Bread that was fresh and soft. Plenty of honey and butter on the side, and a glass of milk not 2 days from the cow. It cost me 5 iron pennies. It may be the best meal I ever ate. It felt strange sitting at a table, eating with a knife and fork. It felt strange being around people. It felt strange having a person bring me food. As I mopped up the remnants of my breakfast with an end of bread, I realized that I had a problem. Even in this slightly grubby inn waterside, I was attracting attention. My shirt was nothing more than an old burlap sack with holes for my arms and head. My pants were made out of canvas and too big by several degrees. They reeked of smoke, grease, and stagnant alley water. I'd been holding them up with a length of rope I had dug out of some trash. I was filthy, barefoot, and I stank. Should I buy clothes or try to find a bath? If I bathed first, I would have to wear my old clothes afterward. However, if I tried to buy clothes looking the way I did now, I might not even be let into the store, and I doubted that anyone would want to measure me for a fit. The innkeep came to take my plate, and I decided on a bath first, mainly because I was sick to death of smelling like a weak dead rat. I smiled up at him. "Where can I find a bath near here?" "Here, if you have a couple pennies." He looked me over. "Or I'll work you an hour instead, a good hard hour. The hearth could use scrubbing." "I'll need a lot of water and soap." 2 hours then. I've got dishes too. Hearth first, then bath, then dishes. Fair?" An hour or so later, my shoulders ached and the hearth was clean. He showed me to a back room with a large wooden tub and a grate on the floor. There were pegs along the walls for clothes, and a sheet of tin nailed to the wall served as a crude mirror. He brought me a brush, a bucket of steaming water, and a cake of lye soap. I scrubbed until I was sore and pink. The innkeeper brought a second bucket of hot water, then a third. I gave a silent prayer of thanks that I didn't seem to be lousy. I had probably been too filthy for any self-respecting louse to take up residence. As I rinsed myself for the last time, I looked at my discarded clothes. Cleaner than I'd been in years, I didn't want to touch them, let alone wear them. If I tried to wash them, they'd simply fall apart. I dried myself off and I used the rough brush to pull through the snarls in my hair. It was longer than it had seemed when it was dirty. I wiped the fog from the makeshift mirror and was surprised. I looked older at any rate. Not only that, I looked like some young noble's son. My face was lean and fair. My hair needed a bit of a trim, but was shoulder length and straight, as was the current fashion. The only thing missing was a noble's clothes, and that gave me an idea. Still naked, I wrapped myself in a towel and left by the back door. I took my purse but kept it out of sight. It was a little before noon and people were everywhere. Needless to say, quite a few eyes were turned in my direction. I ignored them and set a brisk pace, not trying to hide. I composed my features into an impassive, angry mask without a trace of embarrassment. I stopped by a father and son loading burlap sacks into a cart. The son was about 4 years older than me and head and shoulders taller. "Boy," I snapped, "where can I buy some clothes around here?" I looked pointedly at his shirt. "Decent clothes," I amended. He looked at me, his expression somewhere between confusion and anger. His father hurriedly took off his hat and stepped in front of his son. "Your lordship might try Bentley's. It's plain stuff, but it's only a street or two away." I darkened my expression. "Is it the only place about?" He gaped. "Well, it could. There's one—" I waved him impatiently into silence. "Where is it? Simply point, since your wits have left you." "Oh, yeah, simply point, since your wits have left you." He pointed, and I strode off. As I walked, I remembered one of the young page parts I used to play in the troupe. The page's name was Dunsty, an insufferably petulant little boy with an important father. He was perfect. I gave my head an imperious tilt, set my shoulders a little differently, and made a couple of mental adjustments. I threw open the door and stormed in. There was a man in a leather apron who can I only assume was Bentley. He was 40-ish, thin and balding. He jumped at the sound of his door banging against the wall. He turned to look at me, his expression incredulous. "Fetch me a robe, Lackwit. I'm sick of being gawked at by you and every other mueller that decided to go marketing today." I slouched into a chair and sulked. When he didn't move, I glared at him. Did I stutter? Are my needs perhaps inobvious? I tugged at the edge of my towel to demonstrate. He stood there, gaping. I lowered my voice menacingly. "If you don't bring me something to wear," I stood up and shouted, "I'll tear this place apart! I'll ask my father for your stones as a midwinter gift. I'll have his dogs mount your dead corpse. Do you have any idea who I am?" Bentley scurried away, and I threw myself back into the chair. A customer I hadn't noticed until now made a hurried exit, stopping briefly to curtsy to me before she left. I fought back the urge to laugh. After that, it was surprisingly easy. I kept him running about for half an hour, bringing me one piece of clothing or another. I mocked the material, the cut, and workmanship of everything he brought out. In short, I was the perfect little brat. In truth, I couldn't have been more pleased. The clothing was plain but well made. Indeed, compared to what I had been wearing an hour before, a clean burlap sack would have been a great step up. If you haven't spent much time in court or in large cities, you won't understand why this was so easy for me to accomplish. Let me explain. Nobles' sons are one of nature's great destructive forces, like floods or tornadoes. When you're struck with one of these catastrophes, the only thing an average man can do is grit his teeth and try to minimize the damage. Bentley knew this. He marked the shirt and pants and helped me out of them. I got back into the robe he had given me, and he began sewing like the devil was breathing down his neck. I flounced back into the chair. "You might as well ask. I can tell you're dying of curiosity." He looked up briefly from his stitching. "Sir?" "The circumstances surrounding my current state of undress." "Ah, yes." He tied off the thread and began on the pants. "I will admit to a slight curiosity. No more than proper. I'm not one to pry into anyone's business." "Ah," I nodded, pretending disappointment. A laudable attitude. There followed a long moment, the only sound being that of the thread being drawn through cloth. I fidgeted. Finally, I continued as if he had asked me. "A whore stole my clothes." "Really, sir?" "Yes, she tried to get me to trade them for my purse, the bitch." Bentley looked up briefly, genuine curiosity on his face. "Wasn't your purse with your clothes, sir?" I looked shocked, Certainly not. A gentleman's hand is never far away from his purse, so my father says. I waved my purse at him to make my point. I noticed him trying to suppress a laugh, and it made me feel a little better. I'd made the man miserable for almost an hour. The least I could give him was a story to tell his friends. She told me if I wanted to keep my dignity, then I'd give her my purse and walk home wearing my clothes. I shook my head scornfully. Wanton, I said to her. A gentleman's dignity isn't in his clothes. If I handed over my purse simply to save myself an embarrassment, then I would be handing over my dignity. I looked thoughtful for a second, then spoke softly as if thinking aloud. It only follows that a gentleman's dignity is in his purse, then. I looked at the purse in my hands and gave a long pause. I think I heard my father say something of the sort the other day. Bentley gave a laugh that he turned into a cough, then stood up and shook out the shirt and pants. There you go, sir. Fit you like a glove now. A hint of a smile played around his lips as he handed them to me. I slid out of the robe and pulled on the pants. They'll get me home, I suppose. How much for your trouble, Bentley? I asked. He thought for a second. 1 and 2. I began to lace up my shirt and said nothing. Sorry, sir, he said quickly. Forgot who I was dealing with. He swallowed. 1 even would do nicely. Taking out my purse, I put 1 silver talent into his hand and looked him in the eye. I will be needing some change. His mouth made a thin line, but he nodded and handed me back 2 jots. I tucked the coins away and tied my purse firmly underneath my shirt, then gave him a meaningful look and patted it. I saw the smile tug at his lips again. Goodbye, sir. I picked up my towel, left the store, and started my altogether less conspicuous walk back to the inn, where I had found breakfast and a bath. The king is back! What can I get for you, young sir? The innkeeper asked as I approached the bar. He smiled and wiped his hands on his apron. A stack of dirty dishes and a rag. He squinted at me, then smiled and laughed. I thought you'd run off naked through the streets. Not quite naked. I laid his towel on the bar. There was more dirt than boy before, and I would have bet a solid mark your hair was black. You really don't look the same. He marveled mutely for a second. Would you like your old clothes? I shook my head. Throw them away, actually burn them, and make sure no one accidentally breathes the smoke. He laughed again. I did have some other items, though, I reminded him. He nodded and tapped the side of his nose. Right enough. Just a second. He turned and disappeared through a doorway behind the bar. I let my attention wander around the room. It seemed different now that I wasn't attracting hostile stares. The fieldstone fireplace with the black kettle simmering, the slightly sour smells of varnished wood and spilled beer, the low rumble of conversation. I've always had a fondness for taverns. It comes from growing up on the road, I think. A tavern is a safe place, a refuge of sorts. I felt very comfortable just then, and it occurred to me that it wouldn't be a bad life owning a place like this. Here you go, then. The innkeeper laid down 3 pens, a jar of ink, and my receipt from the bookstore. These gave me almost as much of a puzzle as why you had run off without your clothes. I'm going to the university, I explained. He raised an eyebrow. A little young, aren't you? I felt a nervous chill at his words, but shrugged it off. They take all kinds. He nodded politely, as if that explained why I had shown up barefoot and reeking of back alleys. After waiting for a while to see if I'd elaborate, the barman poured himself a drink. No offense, but you don't exactly look to be the sort who would want to be washing dishes anymore. I opened my mouth to protest. An iron penny for an hour's work was a bargain I was hesitant to pass up. 2 pennies was the same as a loaf of bread, and I couldn't count all the times that I'd been hungry in the last year. Then I saw my hands resting on the bar. They were pink and clean. I almost didn't recognize them for my own. I realized then I didn't want to do the dishes. I had more important things to do. I stood back from the bar and got a penny from my purse. Where's the best place to find a caravan heading for the north? I asked. Drover's Lot, up hillside, quarter-mile past the mill on Green Street. I felt a nervous chill when hillside was mentioned. I ignored it as best I could and nodded. You have a lovely inn here. I'd count myself lucky to have one as nice when I'm grown up. I handed him the penny. He broke into a huge smile and handed back the penny. With such nice compliments, you can come back any time. I feel like the clouds went away and the sun came out on this book once again. Chapter 32. Coppers, Cobblers, and Crowds. It was about an hour before noon when I stepped out onto the street. The sun was out and the cobblestones were warm beneath my feet. As the noise of the market rose to an irregular hum around me, I tried to enjoy the pleasant sensation of having a full belly and a clean body. But there was a vague unease in the pit of my stomach, like the feeling you get when someone's staring at the back of your head. It followed me until my instincts got the better of me, and I slipped into a side alley, quick as a fish. As I stood pressed against a wall, waiting, the feeling faded. After a few minutes, I began to feel foolish. I trusted my instincts, but they gave false alarms every now and then. I waited a few more minutes just to be sure, then moved back into the street. The feeling of vague unease returned almost immediately. I ignored it while trying to find out where it was coming from. But after 5 minutes I lost my nerve and turned into a side street, watching the crowd to see who was following me. No one. It took a nerve-wracking half hour and 2 more alleys before I finally figured out what it was. It felt strange to be walking with the crowd. Over the last couple years, crowds had become a part of the scenery of the city to me. I might use a crowd to hide from a guard or a storekeeper. I might move through a crowd to get where I was going. I might even be going in the same direction as the crowd, but I was never a part of it. I was so used to being ignored, I almost ran from the first merchant who tried to sell me something. Once I knew what was bothering me, the greater part of my uneasiness left. Fear tends to come from ignorance. Once I knew what the problem was, it was just a problem. Nothing to fear. As I've mentioned, Tarbian has 2 main sections, hillside and waterside. Waterside was poor, hillside was rich. Waterside stank, hillside was clean. Waterside had thieves, hillside had burglars. I have already told the story of my one ill-auspiced venture, hillside, so perhaps you will understand why, when the crowd in front of me happened to part for a moment, I saw what I was looking for. A member of the guard. I ducked through the nearest door, my heart pounding. I spent a moment reminding myself that I wasn't the same filthy little urchin who'd been beaten years ago. I was well dressed and clean. I looked like I belonged there. But old habits die slow deaths. I fought to control a deep red anger, but couldn't tell if I was angry at myself, the guard, or the world in general. Probably a little of each. "Be right with you," came a cheerful voice from a curtained doorway. I looked around the shop. Light from the front window fell across a crowded workbench and dozens of shelved pairs of shoes. I decided I could have picked a worse store to wander into. "Let me guess," came the voice again from the back. A grandfather gray man emerged from behind the curtain, carrying a long piece of leather. He was short and stooped, but his face smiled at me through his wrinkles. "You need shoes." He smiled timidly, as if the joke was a pair of old boots that had worn out long ago, but were too comfortable to give up. He looked down at my feet. I looked too, in spite of myself. I was barefoot, of course. I hadn't had shoes for so long that I never even thought about them anymore. At least not during the summer. In the winter, I dreamed of shoes. I looked up. The old man's eyes were dancing, as if he couldn't decide whether laughing would cost him his customer or not. I guess I need shoes, I admitted. He laughed and guided me into a seat, measuring my bare feet with his hands. Thankfully, the streets were dry, so my feet were merely dusty from the cobblestones. If there had been rain, they would have been embarrassingly filthy. Let's see what you like, and if I have anything of a size for you. If not, I can make or change a pair to fit you in an hour or two. So, what would you be wanting shoes for? Walking? Dancing? Riding? He leaned back on his stool and grabbed a pair off a shelf behind him. Walking. Thought so. He deftly rolled a pair of stockings onto my feet, as if all his customers came in barefoot. He tucked my feet into a pair of something black with buckles. How do those feel? Put a little weight on to make sure. They're tight. I thought so. Nothing more annoying than a shoe that pinches. He stripped me out of them and into another pair, quick as a whip. How about these? They were a deep purple and made of velvet or felt. Not quite what you're looking for? Don't blame you, really. Wear out terrible fast. Nice color, though. Good for chasing the ladies. He patted a new pair onto my feet. How about these? They were a simple brown leather and fit like he'd measured my feet before he'd made them. I pressed my foot to the ground and it hugged me. I'd forgotten how wonderful a good shoe can feel. How much? I asked apprehensively. What was the wand maker's name from Harry Potter? Ollivander. Instead of answering, he stood and started searching the shelves with his eyes. The shoes choose the wizard, Harry. Okay. You can tell a lot about a person by their feet, he mused. Some men came in here, smiling and laughing, shoes all clean and brushed, socks all powdered up. But when the shoes are off, their feet smell just fearsome. Those are the people that hide things. They've got bad-smelling secrets and they try to hide 'em, just like they try to hide their feet. He turned to look at me. It never works, though. Only way to stop your feet from smelling is to let them air out a bit. Could be the same thing with secrets. I don't know about that, though. I just know about shoes. He began to look through the clutter of his workbench. Some of these young men from the court come in fanning their faces and moaning about the latest tragedy, but their feet are so pink and soft. You know they've never walked anywhere on their own. You know they've never really been hurt. He finally found what he was looking for, holding up a pair of shoes similar to the pair I wore. Here we go. These were my Jacob's when he was your age. He sat on his stool and unlaced the pair of shoes I was wearing. Now you, he continued, have old soles for a boy so young. Scars, calluses. Feet like these could run barefoot all day on stone and not need shoes. A boy your age only gets these feet one way. He looked up at me, making it a question. I nodded. He smiled and lay a hand on my shoulder. How do they feel? I stood up to test them. If anything, they were more comfortable than the newer pair for being a little broken in. Now this pair, he waved the shoes he held, are new. They haven't walked a mile, and for new shoes like these I charge a talent, maybe a talent and two. He pointed at my feet. Those shoes, on the other hand, are used, and I don't sell used shoes. He turned his back on me and started to tidy his workbench rather aimlessly, humming to himself. It took me a second to recognize the tune. Leave the town, Tinker. I knew that he was trying to do me a favor, and a week ago I would have jumped at the opportunity for free shoes, but for some reason I didn't feel right about it. I quietly gathered up my things and left a pair of copper jots on his stool before I left. Why? because pride is a strange thing, and because generosity deserves generosity in return, but mostly because it felt like the right thing to do, and that is reason enough. Now I know that during his stream, Mr. Rothfuss gave out replicas of jots and drabs and such. Let's see if we can find some of those. Yeah, cool. So here's a picture. Let me see if I can throw it up on the screen here. Video capture device 2. That can't be right. Window capture. New window capture. Google Chrome. How do I get a region capture? I don't want to show my whole desktop. Sorry, maybe I should invest time into figuring out how to do this. How to do like a partial screen capture later. Oh man. Yeah, you have to manually configure the numbers. Okay, well, I'll do that some other time, and then I'll be able to show my screen on the stream easily in the future. In the meanwhile, you can do an image search for them. They're kind of interesting, kind of plain. Da, 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 da. 4 days, 6 days of raining. Rowan was the third wagoner I'd asked about going north to Imra, the town nearest the university. He was a thick-bodied Keldish man with a fierce black beard that hid most of his face. Excuse me. He turned away and barked curses in Siaru at a man loading a wagon with bolts of cloth. When he spoke his native language, he sounded like an angry rock slide. His rough voice lowered to a rumble as he turned back to me. 2 coppers. Jots, not pennies. You can ride in the wagon if there is space. You can sleep underneath at night if you want. You eat in the evening with us. Lunch is just bread. If a wagon gets stuck, you help push. There was another pause while he shouted at the men. There were 3 wagons being packed with trade goods, while the 4th was achingly familiar, one of the wheeled ones I had spent most of my early life riding. Rowan's wife, Rita, sat on the front of that wagon. Her mien wavered from severe when she watched the men loading the wagons to smiling when she spoke with a girl standing nearby. I don't know how to pronounce mien. It might be mien for all I know. I've only ever seen it written. I assumed the girl was a passenger like myself. She was my age, perhaps a year older, but a year makes a great deal of difference at that time of life. The tall have a saying about children of our age. The boy grows upward, but the girl grows up. She was dressed practically for traveling. Pants and shirt, and was just young enough for it not to seem improper. Her bearing was such that if she had been a year older, I would have been forced to see her as a lady. As it was, when she spoke with Reta, she moved back and forth between a genteel grace and a childlike exuberance. She had long, dark hair and simply said she was beautiful. It had been a long time since I had seen anything beautiful. Runt followed my gaze and continued. Everyone helps set camp at night. Everyone takes a turn watching. You fall asleep during your watch, you get left behind. You eat with us, whatever my wife cooks. You complain, you get left behind. You walk too slow, you get left behind. You bother the girl. He ran a hand through his thick, dark beard. Bad things happen. Hoping to turn his thoughts in a different direction, I spoke up. When will the wagons be done loading? 2 hours, he said with a grim certainty, as if defying the workers to contradict him. One of the men stood upright atop a wagon, shading his eyes with a hand. He called out, raising his voice over the sound of horses, wagons, and men that filled the square. "Don't let him scare you off, kid. He's decent enough after all the growling." Rowant pointed a stern finger, and the man turned back to his work. "I hardly need to be convinced. A man who travels with his wife is usually to be trusted. Besides, the price was fair, and he was leaving today." I took this opportunity to pull a pair of jots from my purse and held them out to Rowant. He turned to me. Hold on, I have to figure out which voice to do. Okay, sorry. I forgot which one Rowant was for a second. 2 hours. He held up thick fingers to make his point. "You are late, you get left behind." I nodded solemnly. "Riosa tukias aishatua. Thank you for bringing me close to your family." Rowant's great shaggy eyebrows went up. He recovered quickly and gave a quick nod that was almost a small bow. I looked around the square, trying to get my bearings. Someone's full of surprises. I turned around to see the worker who had shouted to me from the wagon. He held out his hand. "Derek." I shook his hand, feeling awkward. It had been so long since I'd made simple conversation with someone that I felt strange and hesitant. Quoth. Derek put his hands behind him and stretched his back with a grimace. He stood head and shoulders taller than me, 20 or so, tall and blond. "You gave Rowant a bit of a turn there. Where'd you learn to speak Siaru?" "An arcanist taught me a little," I explained. I watched as Rowant went to speak to his wife. The dark-haired girl looked in my direction and smiled. I looked away, not knowing what to make of it. He shrugged. "I'll leave you to fetch your things then. Rowant's all growl and not much gruff, but he won't wait once the wagons are packed." I nodded, even though my things were non-existent. I did have a little shopping to do. They say you can find anything in Tarbian if you have enough money. For the most part, they are right. Yeah, so the Johnson drabs, Sage said coins, looking up what the coins looked like, and that's actually the first time I've thought of them as being coins, because they're not like shaped like coins. And I was thinking of them as being shaped like fragments of metal, some of them. I think maybe the implied origin is that they started off as like ingots, like you paid with ingots of metal. And then they just got like smaller and smaller so that they were easy to carry. Now they're just like tiny ingots. No one ever started pressing coins. Like round coins. All the ones I saw on the internet just now were like trapezoidal. Anyway. That's why I imagine like jots to be fragments, because maybe you would like cut up the trapezoid into 3 triangles or something, like, or shims. Shims were the ones that sounded like fragments, probably because, you know, a shim made out of wood is just shaped like a slim equilateral triangle, like a little knife edge. I don't know. Yeah, that's how I imagine it. Oh, I mean, another reason to imagine like that you would cut up the jots is because, you know, like pieces of 8 were eighths of fat Spanish silver, right? You would cut them up into eighths physically. This is back when money was real and not fiat currency, which is a term I learned today. You can click their name. If it's the same as my UI, you can click their name and decipher the glyphs. There are many operations you can do, probably. I made my way down the stairs to Trappist's basement. It felt strange to make the trip wearing shoes. I was used to the cool damp of stone underfoot when I came to pay a visit. As I made my way down the short hallway, a boy in rags emerged from the inner rooms holding a small winter apple. He pulled up short when he saw me, then scowled, his eyes narrow and suspicious. Looking down, he brushed roughly past me. Without even thinking about it, I slapped his hand away from my purse and turned to look at him, too stunned for words. He bolted outside, leaving me confused and disturbed. We never stole from each other here. Out on the streets, it was everyone for themselves, but Trappist's basement was the closest thing to a sanctuary we had, like a church. None of us would risk spoiling that. I took the last few steps into the main room and was relieved to see that everything else seemed normal. Trappist wasn't there, probably off collecting charity to help him care for his children. There were 6 cots, all full, and more children lying on the floor. Several grubby urchins stood around a bushel basket on the table, clutching winter apples. They turned to stare at me, their expressions flinty and spiteful. It dawned on me then. None of them recognized me. Clean and well-dressed, I looked like some regular boy came wandering in. I didn't belong. Just then Trappist came back, carrying several flat loaves of bread under one arm and a squalling child in the other. "Ari," he called to one of the boys standing near the bushel basket, "come help. We've got a new visitor and she needs changing." If you're clicking on Krevek's name, since he's a fellow op, you probably won't be able to ban him. Probably you will only be able to ignore them. Yeah, that's all I know. I'll let you get the next one. Who were you clicking on? I just assumed you were clicking on Krevek's name. The boy hurried over and took the child out of Trappist's arms. He laid the bread on the table next to the bushel basket, and all the children's eyes fixed on him attentively. My stomach went sour. Trappist hadn't even looked at me. What if he didn't recognize me? What if he told me to leave? I didn't know if I could cope with that. I began to edge toward the door. Trappist pointed to the children one at a time. "Let me see. David, you empty and scrub the drinking barrel. It's getting brackish. When he's done, Nathan can fill it from the pump. Pump. I gotta aim those blasts away from the mic. If you ban them, it'll delete their messages automatically en masse. "Can I take twice?" Nathan asked. "I need some for my brother." "Your brother can come for his own bread," Trappist said gently, then looked more closely at the boy, sensing something. "Is he hurt?" Nathan nodded, looking at the floor. Trappist laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Bring him down. We'll see to him." "It's his leg," Nathan blurted, seeming close to tears. "It's all hot and he can't walk." Trappist nodded and gestured to the next child. "Jen, you help Nathan bring his brother back." They hurried out. "Tam, since Nathan's gone, you carried the water instead." "Quoth you run for soap." He held out a halfpenny. "Go to Marna's in the wash. You'll get better from her if you tell her who it's for." I felt a sudden lump form in my throat. He knew me. I can't hope to explain to you how much of a relief it was. Trappist was the closest thing I had to a family. The thought of him not knowing me had been horrifying. I don't have time to run an errand, Trappist, I said hesitantly. I'm leaving. I'm heading inland to Imra. Are you then? He asked, then paused and gave me a second, closer look. Well then, I guess you are. Of course. Trappist never saw the clothes, only the child inside them. I stopped by to let you know where my things are. On the roof of the candle works, there's a place where 3 roofs meet. There are some things there, a blanket and a bottle. I don't need any of it anymore. It's a good dry place to sleep if anyone needs one. No one goes there. I trailed off. That's kind of you. I'll send one of the boys around, Trappist said. Come here. He came forward and gathered me into a clumsy hug, his beard tickling the side of my face. I'm always glad to see one of you get away, he said softly to me. I know you'll do just fine for yourself, but you can always come back if you need to. One of the girls on a nearby cot began to thrash and moan. Trappist pulled away from me and turned to look. What? He said as he hurried over to tend her, his bare feet slapping on the floor. What? Hush, hush. Sometimes I make mistakes and I try to cover it up, so if you're reading along with me, you might be catching me. But it could be an edit. I wouldn't blame them for making little changes here and there. A couple sentences ago there was a comma instead of a period, that sort of thing. You can knee-jerk timeout people, that's totally fine. Even if they were my friend, nothing wrong with that. All right, that's 2 chapters. I feel like we're still ahead of the game in terms of 2 or 3 chapters a night. We're almost halfway through the book. And now I'm going to try to sleep. Probably going to fail. Probably going to be absolute hell to wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m. tomorrow. But that's international travel for you. Did I really say internet travel? Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hope that was fun. Good night. Probably going to take the day off tomorrow, so I'll see you on Saturday. Oh, I haven't left. Oh, yeah, sorry. And, oh yeah, and Saturday, should I move it back to the normal time? Oh, well, I should definitely move it up, because 7 p.m. is pretty early. But 11, yeah, let's move it to 8 p.m. Pacific. I better edit this. Streaming again Saturday at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern. Okay. And with that,